this, do I? I think we're fine.
Or we're being recorded.
Pardon?
Maybe we're being recorded.
We're all
Yeah, is it recorded? Yeah, it's recorded.
So you do have to use the mic.
So I do have to use the mic. Okay. So welcome to the AI Masterclass on Systems, Agents and Productivity. My name is Andrew Reid and I'm part of the Microsoft team in Switzerland, joined by my earnest colleague, Benjamin. We're going to walk you through some of the things that are happening and give you the latest views. If we pause and just look in the rearview mirror for a little while, the speed of change that we're experiencing, the speed with which the technology set in the AI space is advancing. If we go back 10 years, machine learning was the latest thing. If we look at where we are now and the rise of large language models and where the way in which people are changing and evolving their business is changing even faster. If we look at 18 months, 2 years ago, we started launching Copilot and look at where Copilot is now in terms of what it enables. The world's moving faster and faster. Benjamin is going to talk about living in an agentic world and the impact of living in an agentic world. There's some very interesting work that's being done in terms of the rise of the frontier firms, those firms that are built around agents. We're already seeing substantial changes in the way in which new cos in the US are starting to build agent-first organizations, where they're supplementing and enabling their organization through the use of agents, starting with a human supplemented by agents, to getting to a point where you've actually got a human augmented by a collection of agents that's enabling to work. And if you start to read across some of the thinking, it's how far away are we from the first 1 person, 1 billion unicorn? Because we are at a point where the capability and the opportunity to create that type of organization is starting to come towards us. It's a fascinating time to be in the industry. It's a fascinating time to start a company. And the opportunity that sits ahead is huge. I'll leave the rest to your imagination and let Benjamin take you through the details of how it happens.
Thank you, Andrew.
My pleasure.
Right. Luckily, it's not just imagination. We also have concrete facts and use cases that we can look at. Quick round of the room. So just for your information, my name is Benjamin Müller. I'm a technology strategist at Microsoft. I spend my days advising C-level on the new technologies that Microsoft is developing for them to actually adopt them. Quick round of the room. Who is currently in their task or in their company focused around generative AI? Just raise your hands. Okay, a few. Who is interested in the potential of generative AI in driving a company? Raise your hands. Okay, I think that's the main reason why you maybe signed up to this masterclass. And I think that's the best way to start the conversation. So Microsoft has been working for quite some time now with the whole IT evolutions coming through over the last few years and decades. We used to have a digital transformation talk, which is the idea of moving towards cloud, leveraging more of these connected services and so forth to help your employees be more productive and to help you evolve as a company a lot faster. It's now changed from digital transformation to AI-driven business, basically. And we see it across 4 pillars. This is something we pitch to all companies we talk to, because it's to try and get them, at least the C-level, in the right mindset as to how they have to think when AI comes into play for their own company. And this applies to all companies on a horizontal space. The first one you'll find is enrich employee experience. So the first place where you can start focusing within your company is trying to see how can I improve the way my employees internally are working. Make them more happy, make them focus on what's the core business, where they're the most efficient, rather than lose time doing things that are maybe more routine or that could typically be handed over to an agent. The next point of evolution you might want to think internally is reinvent how you engage with your customers. It's always kind of difficult, and we always used to have all these mega-hyped, complicated CRM systems that would maybe allow to improve the way we connect to our customers. But as we see more and more LLMs come into play and how we can provide personalized conversations with our customers, you may want to try and think, and how can I re-engage with them in a different way? So we've looked at the internal side of the company. We look at external stakeholders. The third pillar is one of those more complicated ones, more conceptual ones. It's see about reshaping your business process. We've all been used to, I mean, if we think about hailing a cab, you had to hail a cab down the street, or then you had to know the number, call them up, ask them to come and pick you up, and so forth. Then came Uber, kind of changed the whole process, the full process as to how you hail someone for driving. And the whole point is to think, well, with this new agent process that you could implement, basically having digital labor in your company, how would you rethink the processes that are already in place at this moment, right? Finally, the last pillar is talking about bending the curve. And this hits C-level people when you talk to them quite hard, because they're all focused on growth, right? That's kind of the main goal they have within usual companies. And when we talk about the innovation curve, innovation will help them develop, will help them keep up to pace and be competitive. But that innovation is more like over time, and how we improve and how we grow is more of a linear line. And the whole point is that if you start adopting AI, and if you start adopting it early on, you will bend that curve to be more exponential. So the early adopters, we had Andrew mention these frontier firms. Frontier firms we define as being companies that have already started heavily investing into AI, seeing the potential, actually engaging with their employees and with their customers to start and develop these new kind of processes. And if you can do that, then the impact you'll have on the longer term will just be exponentially higher than what you do if you just wait until something happens and then you adopt it as the innovation comes itself. So first, I think the important thing is to define agents. You may have had an experience in your past. I was at university and I needed to know how to connect to the Wi-Fi, and so we'd have classic chatbots. I think the precursor to agents were chatbots. They were defined kind of conversations you could have with the chatbot. It would provide you the information. It would be a reactive interaction. You would have to go to the chatbot. It would tell you something after you've given it a question. And that's where the limits would stop. Now, we needed to change from chatbots, and this is why we came up with the idea of agents, because an agent is more capable, not only in the conversations that it's able to hold, but also in the actions it's able to take. And this is really the second point where we see this huge potential in the future of being able to adopt them in every company. To give you a bit of a perspective, right? If some of you painstakingly had to create a chatbot in the past, you had to sit down, you had to talk with the business team, define the topics. What are the important topics? What questions are users going to ask? And you'd be bewildered to find out that there are some users who have amazing, unthought, unplanned questions that you would not have imagined, right? So you're quite limited. You had defined those manually offered topics, but you had a missed opportunity in the long tail as to all the questions and the addresses that you might have had from those stakeholders who were engaging with that chatbot. Now, the power of generative AI and how it changes the whole conversational piece with people, the users interacting with it, is that first of all, you can reduce the number of manually authored topics. You will define those very clear paths. For example, I don't know, if a student wants to sign up to get a new device, then that's a very clear path. You know exactly how it works. That's something you can manually author. But for the rest of it, you can actually hand over control to the large language model to be able to understand the question that's been asked, to go through all the potential knowledge sources, the libraries that you have internally to your company, so they can maybe find an answer. And for the action piece, basically allow them to read and connect through APIs to third-party tools. And that's really where it came a bit to a surprise, right? These large language models are not just good at creating natural language when saying sentences and so forth. They're actually really good at understanding code. So if you provide them APIs and comments around the APIs, you can expect them to start to distinguish and to understand, okay, I need to update an account in the ERP system. This is an API which, by the looks of it, asks for the criteria to update that system. So I'll maybe use that. And this is where you start moving over into letting the large language model take action on specific things. So what does it take to create this new type of conversational AI? If you want to create this new typical agent, there are certain things you might have to look for when developing. The first thing is, of course, you need to have a model that has language understanding capabilities, and that's also able to orchestrate, able to understand what are the steps that will have to be taken to be able to achieve the goal that's been given by a user. Next to that, you want to sometimes direct the conversation in a specific area. It's what we were talking about, these manually authored topics that you can define. Sometimes you really want to, you know what has to be done, you need what information you need, and so you need to have dialogue management possibilities in your chatbot, in your agent. After that, you need Gen AI. This is where the large language model comes into play. It has to be able to generate answers, to summarize or to understand and to visualize things for the user as to what needs to be done. In the terms of Microsoft and the solutions we use, we rely on OpenAI heavily. And you also need to integrate to other systems, connectors. This relates to these APIs that allow you to connect to other third-party solutions. So you want a ServiceNow ticketing system. You want that connected to your agent so it's able to create tickets or go and read tickets and give progress. You may want to connect it to, say, a system for invoicing so that it can either fetch the open invoices or help with budgeting and so forth. And this is where the connectors come into play. The agent has to run somewhere. It runs on hardware at some point, and that is something that is also something you'll have to provide, and you'll have to determine over which channels you make them available. You can decide where the user will interact with them. Either it's hidden behind the scenes, or maybe there's an actual interface with the people, be it a website, be it through Teams, internal kind of tools, be it WhatsApp. These are all things that you can actually kind of have to program and think of. From an IT perspective and a developer perspective, you want to be able to monitor what the agent's doing. That's a big piece. Also, when we talk about data privacy, being able to know, okay, what is the agent actually doing? I'm handing over some level of control to it. I need to be able to check and see what the interactions did, what the outcome was, and so forth. And this is something also you have to be able to provide. In the same way, you have to determine security measures, identity access. The agent usually will access knowledge sources, right? Libraries that are within your company. Now, imagine you created an agent that's externally facing. I don't know. Imagine we've got Home Depot and you've ordered something online and you want to interact on the website, right, and ask questions. If the agent has access to everything within the company, you could technically, it's a security risk, right? It would be a way of being able to get into the company and being able to extract data. And so these are things you also have to account for in the limitations that you provide around the agent. And finally, if you're a developer, anything around application lifecycle management is something that's quite critical and that you'd like to be able to consider as well. Now, there are platforms available, there are technologies available. You can do this as well with open source kind of large language models that you can start going in a pro code direction. We ourselves have something called the AI Foundry from Microsoft, which would allow you to be able to create these kind of projects and so forth. But the reality is that the agents and the LLMs are so efficient, you can actually start doing these things by not needing those pro coders. You can actually start this by doing low code. And this is where we came up with Copilot Studio. So I won't go over the details. Essentially, the answer, or what you're supposed to get from this slide is that all the things I listed before, you have to be able to think of when you're creating your agent. You can all manage that and do that within Copilot Studio. In the building, the publishing, but also in being able to analyze and improve the solution itself. Now, so we saw the potential and we realized that as a work platform that Microsoft 365 has become, as well as our other services around ERP, CRMs with Dynamics, that we were in a good position to be able to make sure that we're the forefront for interacting in the workspace with agents. Who here has heard of Microsoft 365 Copilot? Okay, a few hands, right? So if you're a consumer, you'll probably have started, like everyone else, with a ChatGPT account that you would have privately. Microsoft saw the potential and took those LLMs and the power and included it in our own stack of technology, available now in Office, in Exchange, in Teams, and so forth, through this Microsoft 365 Copilot. So basically, you can have Gen AI at your fingertips to be able to help you create and interact with the world. But not only that, we realized, okay, there's a paywall behind our Copilot license. You need to purchase a license. It's got a specific cost. Not every company is going to afford that. That being said, we took a bold move from our end, which is we made the initial user interface available for free to any company who has a working email address. So if you have an email address, you would now be able to access Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat, which is the interface through which you would interact. You can interact either directly in a portal on the web. You can interact with the Copilot Chat in Outlook. It's been added as a button, as well as in Teams. So these are the three areas you'll be able to interact with it. And you'll also be able to call up agents, and that's the whole point. Not only is it your handy little large language model that you can access to be able to ask questions when you're on the fly, on the go, working, but on top of that, you can call up agents and ask the agent that's been developed to do additional things, right? So how do you interact? There are two ways to do so. You can either do it from an end user perspective in the company. It's quite basic as well. You can go through SharePoint or directly in the Copilot Chat and create those agents. Basically, dump a few files and say, look, based on these files, please interact with them. It's in itself not unfamiliar to people who might be working with ChatGPT as well. They have the same type of service. Dump a few files, give it a few instructions, and then it will always react that way. But more interestingly, though, is when we come to Copilot Studio, which is more oriented for the IT team and for developers or citizen developers, as you're able to do a lot more things. And this is when we come to connectors. This is where we come talking about actions and so forth. So the agent spectrum. We have to kind of define what is the agent spectrum. You have agents that are quite what we call simple or simple reflex, that just focus on retrieval. You want an agent to be specialized in an internal policy. For example, what is our expense policy in the company? You could create an agent, just give it the policy files, and it will become an expert on those files. And all it does when you interact with it is goes and fetch that information. But it can go an extra step, and that's where the Copilot Studio thing comes into the game. It can actually perform tasks. The idea is not only say, I'm interested in knowing how many days of holiday we might have in the company, or how many days off can I take if I'm moving from one place to another, but you'd actually like it to engage and to say, okay, look, you know that it takes 2 days if you're moving past 50 kilometers. You can take 2 days off. How about I book that directly for you? And that's the task element. That's where it will proactively, without you having to go into the HR system or whatsoever, you can let the agent go and do that because it already has the information. Or if it doesn't have it, it just asks you what's still missing. Which are the 2 days? When are you moving? Where from where? And it will do that then, perform it for you. And finally, it brings us to the last place, which is autonomous agents. Autonomous agents, this is the really exciting bit. It's the idea that we will no longer need to have a human monitoring or following the agent or proactively guiding it. It would be agents amongst each other all interacting without, and if need be, if escalation be required, they would come up to a human and say, look, we're not too sure about this, but otherwise you could entirely rely on the agents talking amongst themselves and managing the whole company. Sounds a bit utopic, sounds a bit far-fetched. It is phase 3 of this frontier firm system that we've been talking about. But it may be closer than you actually think. So you can see a list of the use cases. Some I've mentioned, some not, but it's essentially those 3 stages you get: retrieval, task, and moving on to autonomy. So, but let's go back to our agent. If we go back to our agent, what are the kind of concepts that we have to understand? First is the natural language understanding. Behind the agent, there you can imagine an orchestrator. And the orchestrator needs to understand what's happening and then engage with the right programs. So we could have Donna here. Donna says, I want to book a flight to Paris next week. How does the natural language understanding break this down? The first thing is called an utterance. It's what the user is going to say to interact with the agent. From an agent side, it has to be broken down. First, we try to define intent. What is the intent of the utterance? And in this case, I want to book a flight. So the orchestrator knows I need to find in all my systems, how do I book a flight? And then you've got entities. The entities here in this case is Paris and next week. So that's information or variables that you'd be able to use for the agent to then apply in the next steps. But concretely, given the intent, given the entities that are summoned, the orchestrator, the natural language understanding program, is then going to define what has to be done. And in this case, our little agent is just going to reply, OK, great. To ensure we got everything right, can you tell me where you're flying from and what your travel class preference might be? Because those are the missing variables that it might still need to be able to actually book the flight. So what do you have to think of when you're talking natural language understanding? So that system, the natural language understanding model, is provided out of the box in Copilot, for example, Copilot Studio. Don't have to configure anything. It's really straightforward, quite simple. There are limitations, though. For example, if an utterance has several intents, I need to book a flight, and could you order me a taxi when we arrive? 2 intents, it will not be able to process that. It has to be 1 intent per query. If you want to go further, you could start working with custom models. So as I mentioned, we have AI Foundry at Microsoft that allows you to develop yourselves, train your own models. Advantages you might find there is, first of all, you can add your own languages. For example, Swiss German is missing in the built-in natural language understanding from our end. It understands German, but not Swiss German. And on top of the languages, you can train it really to be specific to the field or industry you're working with. So say you're in the banking area, and you've got specific kind of words that you're using, I don't know, like bullish and what's the other one? Bearish, I think. If you've got these kind of terms, then you can actually train the model to understand those a lot better and determine the intent and the entities a lot better. Doing that is great. Means a lot more investment from your end in terms of developing time, and you also have to run that, which adds more cost to your model. So not necessarily a given. But more interesting, and this is kind of what's been coming in with Gen AI now, is you can actually work with generative orchestration. So rather than rely on those models that we built ourselves years back by trying to train them the best we can, the large language models are really quite competent. Really quite competent in the sense of being able to understand the languages, determining intent, being able to see the entities. And so this is really more the direction in which we're going. The problem just being LLMs also have other downfalls, typically hallucinations, might be things that you've heard it before. But we try to limit them best we can. If you do go for generative orchestration, basically let the LLM coordinate and orchestrate everything itself. You will be limited, but on different ways. First, you cannot have more than 25 messages in a single topic or conversation. And you can't have more than 127 topics to choose from, because at some point, even the large language model gets lost amongst all the information that's available. So to just visualize it for you all, classic orchestration, which is what used to be done up until now with these chatbots and so forth. You've got topics. You had to read all the topics yourself. If you're lucky, you thought of a topic, you get a response. If you're unlucky, it would have to fall back and try to find information in knowledge. And in the end, otherwise, it just says, sorry, I didn't understand. So this is how it's been done so far. And this would be the new way of working with generative orchestration. And this is where it gets a lot more exciting. Instead of having to code and define every step needed to be done in a specific process, you could just give the agent the tools to do so. So typically, you give him a few topics. OK, these are the conversations we talk about. You give it actions. You say, look, you have access to this email address. You can send emails. You can read emails that come in. And you can update an Excel file, for example. And by giving it these actions, it will determine, given what is being asked, oh, maybe based on what I'm being asked here by the customer, he wants me to send an email to someone else, or a reply with an answer, or he wants me to update an Excel file because he ordered something. And so without having to do the whole path of ordering, you just give it a tool and the access to the Excel file, and it will operate on its own. And so whenever you then have an utterance, it will determine everything that has to be done, and it has no idea what was requested, or doesn't feel it has the tools to do anything. The confidence level is too low. It will just fall back and say, sorry, I can't do this for you, and maybe escalate to a human. So we have a large amount of knowledge sources that you can connect to through Copilot. So you can access, for example, public websites if need be, internal things as well, SharePoint, Dataverse kind of tables, upload your own files, or connect with third-party vendors, SAP systems, ServiceNow systems, and so forth. And it's now a matter of being able to understand, okay, what are the use cases we can go down with to offer an agent to a customer. Maybe worth mentioning responsible AI as well. It's also a topic you may have to handle with customers you engage with, or if you think about it internally. There's a validation process at each of these steps that's done from Microsoft. Verifies that you're not doing anything harmful, or that you're not doing anything illegal or copyrighted, and so forth. If there is a suspicion that what you're doing is illegal or immoral, for example, asking for the salaries of everyone in the company and so forth, then it will just shut down your request and say, I'm sorry, I've determined that this is something I will not answer you for. Right, so maybe make it a bit more visual for you. I would suggest I show you how it works in Copilot Studio. Do I have any questions so far about agents? Who thinks maybe an agent could potentially be used in their own company? Yeah? Have you got a use case already? If you do, come to me. Right, so let's try to visualize this, all right? Copilot Studio is here. You can start by either describing what is the agent that you'd like to do. We've also created specific templates. I'm not going to go in any of the templates or create anything new here. I'll just show you one that I've created this morning. It was partially working, so we'll see if it actually works now. And I created an agent called the email helper. So you can see I've got several ones. I've got a beer bot. I've got a PDF document extractor. But let's have a look at the email helper. So you select an agent, and through the interface, you can see all the things that you need to define. So remember all those categories that I said. You have to think of topics, you have to think of knowledge sources, you have to think of security. All this is basically managed through what we see here. You start by giving it a name, you give it a description. Why is it important to give it a description? In the future, when agents are going to talk with other agents, it will decide which agent to talk to based on the description. So try to be elaborate in the description as well, explaining, look, you focus on incoming emails, you're a research assistant, and you look for answers that you will share to the user before sending out the email to the person who wrote to you. All right, so it's kind of my personal assistant, if you like, for every email that might be coming in. We then define instructions. So if you're in the Gen AI space, you might understand what system prompting is. It's the idea that behind the scenes, you give already guidelines or meta prompts to the large language model. In this case, what have I written? So this one I just wrote a few minutes ago because I realized I created a loop. Never mind. First is, if you get an email from yourself, don't answer it. Why? Because the whole point of my assistant is that it writes me an email. So there's no point replying 10 times to the same email. We got it. So I had to put that in like literally a few minutes ago. I don't know if it'll work. We'll see. But essentially, then you start giving it commands. And this is the beauty of it. I didn't have to go and code or script or connect anything. I simply said, look, when a new email comes in that isn't from myself, very important, use the knowledge sources that you have available to answer the questions and then share it back. Go and use Office 365 Outlook, send an email, which is the action, and reply to this address with the responses from your research. Now, one important thing you'll find is that you have to do this in a multi-step kind of process. Because I started using it, and it would send me an email. The email would be terribly formatted. And so then I realized, maybe I need to give it one more instruction. Please format the email in HTML. That way, it's more readable for me as a user. Respond in a professional manner. Write it as if you were replying to the customer. For each question, create a new paragraph, include any references you might have. If you don't find answers to the question, just don't answer them. And at the bottom, you can always sign saying, kind regards, and my name. So this is the instructions. This is all that's been done. A few paragraphs, right? What are the knowledge sources I've given it? I've given it access to a public website, which is a Microsoft website. I've given it access to a SharePoint site, which has files in it. And the tools, I define the actions, and the actions I've allowed it to be able to do is sending an email. So it's quite straightforward. You can add additional actions if desired, and you just simply do the connection. Send an email, create a connection. You can see it's healthy here, so it should work. And then everything else, like who am I supposed to write to, what am I supposed to write about, and so forth, just dynamically let the AI answer it. Dynamically fill with AI. So I'm really letting the AI take over here. And so we can put it to the test. Of course, the orchestration, remember, either you go on the classic orchestration, which is creating all those topics yourselves. I don't want to bother doing that. So what I'm just going to do here is I'm going to enable the Gen AI orchestration, and we'll try sending an email. So let's have a look. We'll write it to this address. I'll simply go back. There's one important thing I forgot to do, which I'll do now, is I have to publish the agent, of course. With the agent being published, it basically means that we're confirming all the connections and we're handing over control to the Gen AI. Right, so let me go back to my email. I will write this email address, and the question will be swallows. So for example, hi. What is the flying speed of a unladen swallow? All right. So we'll give it a bit of time, and we'll see what happens. So I've now published the agent, so the agent is now active. Let's go see my inbox. It won't be there yet. It will take a bit of time. You can see here the loop I'd created before. That was my mistake. Kept answering to itself. Not that great. So we'll see if it doesn't happen this time. Now, whilst the email's coming in, I'll quickly show you the rest that we have here in the user interface, right? So knowledge sources. We saw that I can add SharePoints, I can add websites. You can add a lot more than simply those, right? And that's the advantage that we offer through here, is that you can go and basically get connections to SQL databases, to third-party service providers, and so forth, to be able to tap that knowledge and give it to the Gen AI. You can, if you want, create these types of topics. Here, they're just the basic ones. Say hello, say goodbye, thank you, and so forth. I didn't bother doing anything else. And if you do want, so this is now an autonomous agent, right? Technically, I'm not going to interact with it after I've published it. It gets the email, it will then reply to the email. I don't have to interface with it, it does everything on its own. But if you do want to have something that interacts with users, you define here the channels that you might want. And so you can see you can have it out on a front-facing public website. You can connect it within Teams for your employees. You can have it posted to Facebook, work within Telegram. These are all easy click channels that you can publish to without having to do too much work on your end, right? So from a development perspective, quite interesting. All right. And lastly, the telemetry, the whole activity monitoring. You can see this all listed here. So whenever a task is performed, it's all being tracked and monitored. So we can look one of the previous ones here, what was done. And you're able to follow it, and that's the essential thing. So, okay, so half an hour ago, it got probably an email, which is one of those loop emails in this case. What it did, so you can see here, this was the content of the email. It comes in a terrible HTML written script. But it understood what it needed to do. So it started looking for knowledge sources. It said, oh yeah, he was asking about the Nimbike 2000, which was one of the files I stored underneath in the agent. And so it found that file, and it decided, okay, I reviewed the different knowledge sources. I reviewed the public website of Microsoft, but there's nothing about Nimbike 2000, right? So I'll just ignore it. But I did select what was in the file. And based on that, I then decided to write an email which provided the information, detailed information about the NIMBike 2000, explaining what it is and what they could use, right? And lastly, if it is being used frequently by your whole company, you want to be able to monitor the impact it has on your business, and you can do this through analytics. You can see how many users interacted with it. Did people fail when interacting with it? Did we find a blocker or not? Okay. All right. So the other email hasn't landed yet. We'll just give it a bit of time. I'll switch back to the slides in the meantime to give you other type of examples that we may have had concretely. So we have a list of customer references that I can share with you without going too far in. We can have a look at what McKinsey did, for example. So McKinsey had one process. If you're talking of McKinsey, they get asked to be able to perform a miraculous task that they've never done before, probably. But what they do have is very smart people in the company. Smart people, smart skills, smart consultants. The problem is, when you've got so many people, you have to find them. Where do I have internal to the company the right person who's available on that slot time for the customer that I can engage? So what they did is they created an engagement management agent, which was running fully autonomously. And this is kind of the structure it had. So when a customer would be sending in a request for a new project, it arrived by email. You would define first, analyze the email to extract the customer who's asking, determine what engagement and the industry in which they're working they'd like us to work for, assess the historical data we have of other people in the company based on the on ERP systems, and then write directly to that potential consultant asking them, would you be interested, are you available for this specific project, right? Something that would have to be coordinated in the past by someone could now be handed over fully to an agent. Simply connected to these different kind of databases, so giving it the ability of writing email, being able to understand the staffing in the ERP system, and then any time that a request came in from a customer, concretely, you'd have the consultant being picked straight away. I think I even have a small video I can show you. Let's see if this actually works. There's no sound, don't worry. So there you go. So this is the example of an email that'd be coming in. It'd be sent to a centralized email address, engagement@mckinsey.com. As soon as the customer or the email would land in the inbox, you would then have the agent engage. So the first thing he does is, okay, I know who the customer is, I identify the entities, what are the engagements that are currently going, what industry is that customer in, understanding, okay, what's the relevant expertise I will need based on the request that came in, and then identifying the people. From there on, after having retrieved all that information, finding who the internal consultant is, the company, it would simply write that email to the consultant and say, there you go, Bob's your uncle. Let's see how everything works. And this is, you can take screenshots if you like, this is essentially the instructions that was written. So 6 paragraphs to get the agent to be able to fully function in that way. And that's the beauty of it. That's really how simple you can start relying on the large language model to be able to actually perform actions and distribute, triage things, for example, in a company. You've got the trigger you define, which is when the email comes in, and then you've got the different actions and the knowledge sources, which we've seen previously, right? Good. Let's quickly go back to that email, see if it's actually gone through. So we'll reload here, track the activity. All right. So it does still seem to loop. So I'm still doing mistakes on my end. You can see this by the fact that every minute a new email has been coming in since. But the initial email that came in, we can see it here, right? was the request from my email address, which was asking about what is the flying speed of an unladen swallow. Checking through the knowledge sources, it didn't find anything relevant in this case, and then sending a reply email. And so it sent an email to myself, responding saying, "Thank you for your question. The flying speed of an unladen swallow is something referenced to Monty Python, blah, blah, blah. Here's a guest exclamation. And then, of course, if you're interested in more information about swallows and flight patterns, you may want to look into studies and birdwatching resources." So it does actually go and wrote that email back to myself so that I could technically take this, see if this answer is satisfying for myself, and then simply forward it back to the initial person who asked for it, without me having had to spend time finding the answer to that question myself. Right? Okay. So, that's it so far for the definition of an agent. I think, moreover, and next to the use cases, you may want to start thinking as to what is it that you could do in your company. And it's kind of difficult because we start thinking of horizontal kind of processes that could be interesting for all companies, as well as some that are more vertical. These are the kind of main use cases that we see companies requiring agents, or where we could engage agents quite quickly if they don't yet have a solution, right? So it may be that, of course, the company has a complex CRM or ERP system which already covers some of that. But that being said, for those who might not have something but still would need it quite quickly, these use cases are the ones you may want to consider first. It goes across everything, right? I'm not going to do them all, but typically being able to help orchestrate event planning or qualifying people for loan applications. These are all things that you can start relying on the agent to actually perform. So you heard us speak a bit about these frontier firms. And so I'll give you the final definition of what a frontier firm is and what all companies should aspire to become. First of all, phase one that we see for frontier firms is, of course, starting to use Gen AI as an assistant, basically enhancing the work that's already being performed by your employees. In the future, and what we're now trying to aspire to, at least internally at Microsoft, is that every human employee kind of becomes a manager, becomes a boss. Not of other people, of course, but of agents that it will create and assign and delegate tasks to. So phase two would be having human-led agents where anything comes in, but rather than you as an employee have to process it, you can simply delegate it to the agent, let the agent handle it, and do that orchestration yourself. And at some point, in some near future, we'll reach this kind of human-led organizations, but are fully operated by agents. Our own CEO, Satya Nadella, laughs about the fact that in 5 years he'll be replaced by an agent himself to determine the strategy of the company. Now, I don't know if we'll go that far, but it will be that you rely more on agents to do things and to understand processes and to change their way they operate if there's something that changes in the environment. But until then, all we have to do is to start building those first agents. Interestingly enough, we had a work trend index which came out, and it's based on some LinkedIn data. It's based on our own Microsoft 365 data that we have there. The most important skill that is now required, or in 2025 that was flagged in LinkedIn, is no longer soft skills such as conflict mitigation, innovative thinking. The first skill that's actually been asked in all the hiring positions coming up has been AI literacy. So my recommendation to you is, if you haven't yet an AI strategy, if you haven't yet got a guideline or a path that you see yourself going down, try thinking of increasing the AI literacy of your employees so that you can then rely on them to do that next step for you. With that, work on hiring your first digital employees, aka building your agents. In the HR world, we're starting to see a new ratio or a new metric, which is called the human agent ratio, determining how many employees do you have in the company compared to how many agents you have in the company. So set a ratio, maybe 1 human for 5 agents, maybe 1 for 3 to start with, and see that from a global strategy perspective, and then start today, basically. If you'd like to learn more, there's a link, aka.ms/Copilot Studio Get Started. You will be able to find a lot of information there and trainings so that you yourselves can start working on agents. I think we're at time. Are there any questions that you might have? Agents that you've tried, yeah? Go ahead.
Version control.
Version control of agents.
Yeah.
So Copilot Studio is based on our Power Platform kind of environment, if you like. You do have environment version. You can control things for environments. I haven't yet seen versioning control for the agent itself.
Does it support, I don't know, like configuration through, coding and stuff like that, not through the UI?
So,
That would
yep.
be the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in that case, what usually happens is people rely more on the AI Foundry, and there you can build your kind of DevOps continuous development there. Yeah, that would be the answer for it. But no APIs for the Copilot Studio, not yet. Yep.
To which extent can you run this on-prem?
Haha, the famous dagger. So the question was, to which extent can this be run on-prem? I'm repeating for the mic. It is a cloud service. The large language models that are provided by Microsoft run in the cloud, so you will have to use cloud for that. Anything that is on-prem will have to be mirrored or sent up to the cloud so that the large language model can then use it, essentially. However, that being said, if we go in the direction of AI Foundry and of doing some pro development, what you can do is you can use Copilot Studio as a package to create your agent, but within the package itself, you rely on another large language model that would maybe be on-premise, for example. And that is kind of a way of doing that separation between the two. So the package would still be up in the cloud, but everything running, the whole data, evaluate data privacy and so forth, would be on-premise. You'd only have the prompts and the completions up in cloud. Yeah. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. In that case, I wish you good luck with creating your own agents in your companies. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.